Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. It's been a while. I think it's been about 3 weeks, a month or so since I've posted anything. I've just had a lot of life stuff going on, health stuff in the family. It's been a tough month and a half or so, and I'm sure I'll explain it all in a future video at some point. But I've just not really had the brain space or the energy to make any fun videos in the month of February, hence why it's been a bit. But I have really missed it. I've missed being a part of the community. I've still watched a ton of videos. I'm all caught up. I comment here and there, but I just haven't contributed to the conversation per se. I've really missed this creative outlet, and it brings me a lot of joy to make videos, and I need to get back to it. So despite not making many videos, I was still reading in the month of February, which is what I'm talking about today, my February reading wrap up, the books that I got to read last month. So let's get into it. I'm gonna start with my classic that I read this month. I picked up Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier for the FOMO book club. I will link below the live discussion, the live show that Gem of Books, Alice from the Giant Bookshelf, and Spread Book Joy hosted. It was a ton of fun discussing this book with them, and this was my third du Maurier. I really loved Rebecca. I thought My Cousin Rachel was fine, and ultimately Jamaica Inn also landed at fine. I gave it 3 stars. It is gothic, it is creepy, it is violent, it is depressing. I like sad books, but they need some hope. I've said this before, and ultimately that's why this book didn't shine for me like it did for some people, is because it was just so sad, so tense the entire time. There was no reprieve. The main character, she at times is brave, she at times is stupid, and it's very frustrating to root for her, but the author did a beautiful job creating the atmosphere. That is never her problem. I think with Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel, and with this one, the atmosphere, the sense of place is really well done, and this one is dark and gloomy on the moors in Cornwall, and a very creepy inn, and a very violent, abusive man, and a young woman trying to figure out what to do in her situation. So that was my personal takeaway with this one. I still want to read more du Maurier. Nothing has beat out Rebecca for me. It wasn't a favorite, but I'm still glad I read it. So next, let me touch on the historical books that I read. This first one is historical fiction, but it's also technically alternate history because these events never happened, but this was like as if they would have happened. And I'm talking about 1000 White Women by Jim Fergus. This was on my list of 23 books to read in 2023, and I'm glad that I got to this one sooner. It was a really good book. It was a really heavy book. This is a take on a government program that never really happened, but maybe would have, about how the Cheyenne indigenous people made like a pact with the president and the government about giving them horses and taking white women to infiltrate their community in hopes of bringing peace and bridging the two peoples and cultures together. And so this follows a woman named May Dodd, she's the main character, and a bunch of other women that are sent on this train ride and then eventually join the native people and live among them and what their lives were like and the events that happened. It is pretty brutal and descriptive. There's a lot of sexual violence and rape scenes and murder, brutality and violence all throughout. It was a very hard-hitting book, but really well written at the same time. I think that what shocked me is this book was published in 1998, so way over 20 years ago, and I would have never guessed this could have been written like 5 years ago. And I am just not at all well informed in where this book holds up in the context of what living with indigenous people was like in this time period if this happened. Like, how true of a representation is this? I'm sure that it probably received some negativity because it did portray some savagery, as often the author used that word, and really obvious racism and bigotry that came from the white people interacting with the natives. All that to say, I thought it was really interesting, really well written. It was very immersive. It drew me in. I felt like I was reading a true diary entry of a real woman who experienced these events. It too had a really great sense of place. I felt like I was there. I was watching all of these events unfold, and I thought the characters were really well rounded. So overall enjoyed it, but this is not an easy book, and I would put a lot of trigger warnings for those that maybe avoid some heavy topics. The other historical alternate history, technically set in contemporary times but in a weird world, is Underground Airlines. This is also another book on my 23 books to read in 2023, and I DNF'd this one. Did not finish it, put it down at about 15%. I was listening to the audiobook. I probably could have tried a little more, but with where my life is right now, I was just like, I'm not enjoying this book, and this is not going to be above a 3-star if that for me, so I don't want to push through, which is good to remind myself that I can do that with books. But this one was also just really dark and heavy right off the bat. The character is a very unlikable, gritty character, and gritty is a word that is an anti-buzzword for me. Like, I hate when books are gritty and dark and like brutal and violent. It just had all of those themes. I guess I should say from the 15% that I read, the sense that I got was slavery was never overturned. The North and South are still divided. And so slavery still continues in the South on plantations, but it's like as if in today's times. And we have a main character that works for the government to catch runaway slaves. And he is a black man. I think he's doing it just to survive, and that's just his profession. And so he's kind of this like rogue undercover guy who pretends to be sympathetic to the Underground Railroad or Underground Airline cause and to those that are trying to free slaves from the South, but actually he's trying to catch them and turn them in himself. So we get this character that has his inner turmoil of his life choices and what he's dealing with, and that juxtaposition, which is probably really interesting and more unpacked throughout the book, but I just wasn't feeling it. And it also jumped around a ton. I was having a really hard time with the timeline and what the character was doing at what time and what place, because it jumped around all over the place, and I honestly was just a bit confused, and I really wasn't vibing with like the dark, gritty energy, so I put it down. But I can imagine that a lot of people would really like this book. My other true historical fiction book that I picked up in February was The Coronation Year by Jennifer Robson. This is my second book by the author. I read The Gown last year and really enjoyed it, and this is actually an e-arc and electronic advanced reader copy from NetGalley, and I also thoroughly enjoyed it. In this book we follow 3 different perspectives but one timeline in the months leading up to Queen Elizabeth II coronation in 1952, I believe. And the main perspective is a woman who owns this historic hotel, and she's trying to keep it afloat, and it just happens to be along the procession route of the coronation, so the Queen's gonna be passing it. And so a lot of the businesses on that route are getting some love and some hype from tourists that will be coming in and from the people that will be coming into the city to be a part of this grand event. Overall, really enjoyed my time. I gave this book 4 stars. The one little thing that I didn't love was there's this like twist towards the end of the book about an evil bad guy who's trying to sabotage the hotel, and it just felt very silly, very out of left field, and like did not pace along with the book and the characters and the setting that this author was making. It just felt like a random like action movie throw-in of this like evil guy who's trying to make bad stuff happen and like hurt people, and I was like, what? This is so weird. This does not fit in the theme of the rest of the book. But it wasn't terrible enough to make me hate the book. I just wish the author kind of reworked that story. But overall, there were wonderful themes of friendship and love and romance in a very light way, and also like trying to find your place in the world and your footing, especially within your career. We have a woman who's this hotel owner, we have a man who's an artist and a painter, and then another woman who's a photographer, and we get a glimpse in all of their worlds and what they're doing with their life and how all of those stories and then characters kind of converge. It was great. If you are a historical fiction fan and you've read The Gown before especially, I think you'd really enjoy this book. It is coming out April 4th of this year. I'm very excited that I read a book ahead of its publication date, so that's fun. The next book I'm going to talk about is actually a really fun little thing that I decided to join, which is an in-person cookbook club based on an acquaintance that I know, and she started this and hosted it. And basically every month a group of people will meet at a house, and it's about 12 of us. We pick one cookbook, the host picks the cookbook, and then we each pick a recipe without doubling up, and we bring that dish, and then we all share food together, and we talk about the cookbook and our experience with it, how it was like to make the recipe, and then ultimately just get to know one another. But I was just so excited to join because I thought that is such a fun idea to try more cookbooks. Like I check out cookbooks all the time from the library, but I maybe will make one of the dishes, if that. You know, I flip through and I look at stuff and I'm like, that sounds good, but I just don't have the capacity. I'm just not the kind of person to like try a bunch of recipes all in a row. But this way you try like 12 to 15 recipes from one cookbook at one time, and you can be like, yeah, I really liked that and I would totally buy this book or not. Anyways, really fun idea. I'm so excited to be part of this. But the first cookbook that we all cooked from was The Lost Kitchen by Erin French, Recipes and a Good Life Found in Freedom, Maine. This is a beautiful book with some gorgeous photographs and a story inside, like a very personal story from the author. And I realized this author actually has a whole separate memoir of her life. But all that to say, I gave this cookbook 3 stars. Very beautiful, well made, but at the end of the day, the recipes are super niche and specific to like ingredients in the Northeast region and Maine specifically, and also really weird vogue ingredients that I just would never cook with or am gravitated towards trying. A lot of strange meats like moose and deer and rabbit and vegetables that I would just never really get my hands on. So this is definitely a cookbook for someone I think who's more advanced, has a bigger palate, who's not just like cooking everyday things at home. Someone who really loves to explore in the kitchen, which is not necessarily me. I do enjoy cooking now and again, but when it's like too froofy, you know, I'm like, not gonna really love this. So that's kind of the vibe. This was very like beautiful and elegant and chefy. Cookbooks are technically nonfiction, so we're moving into nonfiction here. I randomly, don't know how the theme was, but I picked up 4 celebrity memoirs in February. I guess I was just in the mood. They're really great to listen to. They were all narrated by the author themselves. I started with Waypoints by Sam Heughan. I am a fan of Outlander, the book and the TV series. I'm not all caught up, but that is where I know Sam Heughan from. He's known as Jamie Fraser. I really had no intention to read this, but then Becca from Teacup the Storyteller raved about it, and so I was like, I really like celebrity memoirs now and again, so I'm gonna pick it up and listen to it. And I overall enjoyed it. In this book, he tells two simultaneous stories. One of how he grew up, how he became an actor, and right alongside that, he talked about his 96-mile foot journey of walking the West Highland Way, which is this footpath in Scotland. Kind of similar vibes to Wild by Cheryl Strayed, like a person taking this solo journey backpacking through the wilderness to, you know, figure something out of themselves. And so you get those two perspectives of present day, walking the trail, thinking on his life, reflecting, and then also going back in time and telling the story of his life and his career. So totally enjoyable. If you're a fan of Outlander, you might like it, or acting. I mean, it wasn't like an incredible, impactful memoir to me specifically. It wasn't at all relatable because I don't know anything about acting or the filming industry, and or walking a 96-mile trail just sounds like absolute hell to me, so I would just never do it. But I appreciated hearing about his perspective, so that was fun. Secondly, based on an in-person recommendation from someone I work with at the library, I picked up Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. How to dance it out, stand in the sun, and be your own person. Shonda Rhimes is the creator of the television series Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, and most recently Bridgerton. And this is her memoir. I also listened to the audiobook that she narrated, and overall it was just really interesting to hear about her life. I knew absolutely nothing about this person except that she writes all those television shows. So this also had some behind the scenes of the television and Hollywood industry. But overall, this was a lot more personal to Shonda Rhimes and her life, and how she found herself in this predicament that she closed her life off from any kind of publicity and just had a really hard time saying yes to anything. She kept saying no. She kind of isolated herself, just put her head down and stuck to work. And her sister pointed that out to her once, of like, you don't do anything. And so she decided to change her life and start saying yes to things, specifically publicity and like big asks that she was always asked to do that she always said no to. So she had to give a speech, and she went to this event and did this photo shoot and started doing all these things, and then ultimately learned to say yes to other things and other opportunities and kind of listening to herself. I really enjoyed the parts of learning about her personal life and the different experiences that she had and her perspective on some things, but there is a part towards the end and also a little bit throughout the book where it was really self-helpy at the same time. Like, it was just like motivational speaking kind of thing, and I just didn't really love that, and I didn't particularly totally agree with everything that she was saying and in some aspects. And so I give this one 3 stars. Enjoyable, I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I wasn't like, wow, that's such an amazing memoir, everyone needs to read it. And as a fan of Grey's Anatomy, I just finished watching all 19 seasons, so I'm all caught up. It was fun to get some behind the scenes of like Grey's Anatomy and different things. This was written quite a bit ago, so this was like way before Bridgerton, mainly focused on Grey's Anatomy because I think that's what like gave her her start. So hearing some of those stories was also fun. Next, I picked up the controversial, I don't know if it's controversial, Spare by Prince Harry. I love the show The Crown. That's really been my only exposure to like the royal family. I've never really kept up. I honestly had no idea what was going on with Harry and Meghan. I was just like, yeah, they like moved to the US. Like, I didn't know anything about like the scandal. And then I was on a plane ride in January and I watched the entire Harry and Meghan documentary, like 4 episodes on Netflix. And I know that it's biased because it was like created by them, but I'm such a Harry and Meghan fan now, and I'm like, yeah, they deserved better. Like, people treat them so mean, and like people hate them for no reason, and just like all this stupid stuff. And I know everyone has differing opinions. Anyways, all that to say, after watching that, I was like, I want to read Spare and hear about his perspective. I think I gave this one 3.5 stars. I enjoyed my time with it. Incredibly vulnerable. Prince Harry goes into very detail of his life. Specifically, it starts with his childhood and the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and how that impacted him so much, and then all throughout his life so far. He hasn't lived very long, but he's experienced a lot, and he's grown a lot, and his perspective has changed. He doesn't shy away from airing the dirty laundry and telling all of the gritty details of everything that he got up to, all the stupid stuff and mistakes that he made, and all of the conflict within the royal family, specifically between him and his brother, him and his dad, and Camilla, just like the different stuff that he's butted heads with within like the royal family and the way that it all works. So it was really interesting to hear. I enjoyed it. I mean, I don't think like everyone needs to read this. It wasn't, again, an amazing memoir. It was just a very vulnerable, like, here's what happened in my life. It is quite sad. Like, overall, there is clear tension and resentment between people in the family. I'm just like, oh, y'all just need to like sit down and like talk it out. I hope he eventually finds some reconciliation with his family and some peace can be made, but it was an interesting listen. And then finally, for celebrity memoirs, I picked up Becoming Free Indeed, My Story of Disentangling Facebook Faith from Fear by Ginger Duggar Vuolo. Another peek into my life, I was a huge fan of 19 Kids and Counting on TLC. So it's a reality TV show about a very conservative religious family that didn't believe in birth control, and so they had 19 kids, and the show went on for a while. I didn't even realize there was another show called Counting On. Never watched that, but I watched a lot of the 19 Kids and Counting. And then a YouTube video popped up of her like talking to people about how she wrote this book and how she lives in LA now and kind of didn't leave the faith, but disentangled her faith from really problematic and conservative theology that she grew up believing, specifically from a false teacher, really like a cult leader named Bill Gothard. So after watching that clip on YouTube, I was like, I should pick up her book. I'm just curious what she has to say. Overall, it was fine. It was interesting to hear about some things that she disentangled, but it was very basic. I think this book probably hits home to a lot of people that maybe experienced a similar background or growing up in a very conservative, legalistic faith and background where you just had to follow certain rules and there wasn't necessarily a reason why those rules applied, but you had to follow them or else you're going to hell and God hates you. And even though I personally grew up in a very weird cult-like church and have left that, there was some relatability to like the aspect of this false teacher or like this man who's really manipulative and taking advantage of people. I could relate to some of that, but overall, someone who is a Christian, this book wasn't anything like exciting or new or interesting to hear. It was, again, it was just very basic, and she just talked about a specific rule and then a Bible verse that she now understands like why that rule doesn't really apply. And so she just takes all these ideologies that she had and kind of breaks them down. It jumped around a lot in timeline and was very repetitive, so it wasn't an amazing story, but I'm happy for her and the life that she's leading, and I have nothing against it. So this book could totally work for some people. I just found it to be a little bit boring and basic. Maybe after reading some of the other celebrity memoirs, I was expecting a little bit more tea or like a little bit more dirt of like behind the scenes stuff in her family, but she didn't really touch on anything. She has like full respect and love for her parents and her upbringing and her family and all that kind of stuff. She didn't hate on anyone except for Bill Gothard, this teacher. And even then she was kind of like, he had some issues, but she didn't like actually call out being like, no, he was like an evil man that messed some stuff up. But anyways, that was my experience with this one. My goodness, I've been talking for a bit, but let's end with some picture books really quickly. Picture books have become a regular part of my reading. They're wonderful palette cleansers. I have a great time with them, so I will include them in these wrap-ups. I picked up Love in the Library by Maggie Takuta Hall. This was a recommendation from a lovely viewer, so thank you for recommending this to me. This is a historical fiction picture book about a girl that works in the library at a internment camp, a Japanese internment camp during the war, and this is her story of like finding love and meaning in life. It's very simple, very sweet. I enjoyed it. Give 4 stars. I thought it was a very cute historical fiction picture book. On a recommendation from Miriam Elizabeth Reads, I picked up Lights on Wonder Rock by David Litchfield. This has some beautiful illustrations about a girl who befriends an alien and then waits a long time to see the alien again. It's full of anticipation and wonder and whimsy, and it was cute. I didn't fully love it, and the message was okay, but I thought the illustration style was lovely. I picked up The Circles in the Sky by Carl James Mountford. I just saw this cover and picked it up at the library. And this was a really interesting book. The illustration style was unique, but the messaging was very intense. This is a book about like grief and death. I cannot imagine reading this to a child because I feel like there would be a lot of questions, but maybe if you were specifically looking to talk to your child about death, maybe like death of a pet or a parent or a grandparent or something, this could potentially help along with that. But it had some really intense themes, so this is not just like a book to pick up at random and just to read out loud to your child. There might be some difficult discussion needed after reading this book. And this one was featured at a bookstore for like picture book of the year, The Moonlight Zoo by Maudie Powell-Tuck and illustrated by the same person who illustrated the previous book. This one was very whimsical, lovely illustrations, beautiful artwork and coloring, so I really enjoyed that part. This is all about a young girl who loses a cat, and then at night she discovers this zoo underneath her bed of all the creatures that have ever been lost, and this wolf like leads her on this quest to find her cat. It was really cute. Again, very whimsical, dreamlike, ethereal, like that kind of vibe. I thought this was a very beautiful picture book. So those are all of the books that I got to read in the month of February. Let me know your thoughts on any of them if you've read them or have any desire to read them. Feels good to make a video again and to be back, and hopefully you'll be seeing my face around here more often than not. So thank you so much for spending some time with me and watching today, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.